You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist, and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hi everyone, this is Paige. Welcome back to another episode of Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited to bring you this conversation all about the word health with my friend Megan Kazmarczyk. I hope I said that last name right, Megan. I'm trying. We thought that it would be really helpful as two dietitians to kind of sit down and explore this word that gets thrown around all the time, this word healthy, and really talk about how it affects us, how it either helps or doesn't help us, and kind of unpacking it to the degree that we can look at it with some clarity and understand how it might be able to help us and work in our lives. So that's what we talked about in this podcast episode. I'm excited to share it with you. Megan is just a fabulous dietitian. She is located in the Boston area, and she does a lot of really great work online as well if you'd like to follow along with her stuff. And I'm really excited to bring you this episode with her. Just a quick reminder, if you're interested in any of the online offerings that I have the Positive Nutrition Academy with lots of online courses and webinars. You can check that out. They're available at any time, and they're all completely online and self-paced. You can go to positive-nutrition.com/academy. And as always, just don't forget, there's so many podcast episodes that I've done in the past. If you are kind of new around here, be sure to check out podcast titles and just kind of hit on the ones that sound interesting to you. No need to go in order with the podcast. There's podcasts about raising kids. There's podcasts about kind of some of the basics of intuitive eating, talking about body positivity, some interviews with therapists and talking about their perspectives on all of these things. And so check that all out. And thanks so much for being here. It's always fun to be able to put these things out, and I appreciate you, and I hope you enjoy this episode with Megan. Hi, Megan. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast.
Hi, Paige. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Megan, take a minute and introduce yourself to the listeners and talk about what you do and who you are.
Sure. So I am an eating disorder dietitian in the Boston area. Currently, I see clients at a group practice locally, in addition to working very part-time at an eating disorder treatment center. And I also have my own virtual private practice where I see clients looking to heal their relationships with food.
Awesome. So a dietitian, very similar work that I do.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. All eating disorders, disordered eating, chronic dieting, that type of thing, just in different settings, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, kind of getting a switch up from the daily grind, right? Like you get to have
exactly.
some, yeah, that's nice. How did you get into the field of eating disorders?
Yeah, so I have a pretty unoriginal story, which is to say that I had my own disordered relationship with food when I was choosing what to go to college for. So I didn't realize at the time that that's what was going on for me. I just knew that, like, I've been reading a lot of things about nutrition on the internet, and I seemed really into it. So I ended up majoring in nutrition right out of high school, and so that's kind of what led me there. Like I said, didn't really realize that's what was going on for me, and I think a lot of things that I can look back now and see were pretty disordered were reinforced by the program I was in. Not
That's such a bummer.
it it is not intentionally, but the way my mind construed things at the time, I don't know how helpful it was. And being a nutrition major, I was able to get by under the guise of health for a long time. Like I was just the healthy one, which I know is the case for a lot of people who major in nutrition. So that is how I got into the field, and then from there, as I started my own healing, it was very complicated. I wasn't sure that I actually wanted to be a dietitian. I kind of got into it for reasons that weren't entirely pure, for lack of a better term. And by the time I was in my internship and had graduated from my internship, I started doing a lot of research into health at every size and intuitive eating and eating disorders. And that all made so much sense to me that I really didn't want to do anything else. um, so yeah, that was a little bit
How
about how
did
I got here.
you like what happened for you where you started to realize like, wait a minute, this whole like healthy girl identity is
Mm,
maybe problematic? Like what are some things you could point out or highlight that just didn't feel right or feedback you got from other people or stuff in your own body?
yeah,
How did you know it wasn't just healthy?
yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I personally dug my head in the sand for a long time, and I was like, no, everything's fine. This is normal. And then I did start going to therapy in the middle of my college experience. For what drove me there originally was just like general life anxiety stuff. But I remember that person to me at the time being like, this is an eating disorder you're talking about. And I remember being like, no, no way. Like that's not me. And I remember going home, and this sounds so silly because I feel like as a nutrition major, I should have had more awareness of eating disorders, but I really didn't. And I remember going home and Googling it, and I was like, oh, all of these things apply to me. Um, and once I had that awareness, I think it was easy to, not easy, sorry, but I started to have more awareness around like, this doesn't really feel very good. And I don't know how sustainable this is. And in the end, what kind of pushed me towards healing was like, I don't think I can do this much longer. Nothing, I'm not showing up the way I want to show up. I'm not connecting with people the way I want to connect with people. But I give a lot of credit to the therapist I was seeing at that time. Otherwise, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what would have happened.
And maybe like some of that is your anxiety or other stuff you were dealing with, like brought you to therapy, which your therapist helped you kind of see, like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't actually
Right.
truly healthy. Like in some ways it's kind of cool because maybe your body or your mind was like getting you help in an indirect way, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Like I have always been a baseline anxious person, but I think during that time my anxiety really felt unbearable, and that was really a product of um, like restriction and overexercising and just not having, my brain was not nourished enough to
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, to be fully present or aware or calm myself down or have
Yeah,
any sort of like coping skills.
right. So when she pointed, or she or he pointed that
it
out
was
to you, is it she?
it was a woman, yeah.
Okay. Um, pointed that out to you, were you resistant or were you kind of like, wait a minute, maybe there is something there? What kind of, I
Mm,
don't know, like how did you start to challenge that? Because when when being the healthy person, quote unquote, is such an important part of your identity, it's really common to get really defensive. It's common to kind of um, not believe them or run away or like go find a new therapist or whatever. You know, if someone's telling you something you don't really want to hear, challenging a core part of who you feel like you are,
Right.
that's not easy. And I think that it could be kind of cool to dive in there because I think a lot of listeners will really relate to that, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember that moment very, very vividly. I can remember like the office. I can remember exactly where I was sitting and what was on the table. Like it seemed like a real turning point for me. And I think there was a part of me, I know as soon as she said, she kind of gave me a diagnosis, I remember being like, no, like I don't think that's right. But I also think there was a part of me that knew something wasn't right. Like I could look around to the people around me and be like, I seem way more invested in my daily runs than these people are. Or, and there was a whole host of other things. So I think there was part of me that felt some relief, but that was really tied up with a lot of like anxiety of like, if this is true, that means I will probably have to challenge it or work on it, which I didn't really know if I was ready to do. I didn't even know what that would look like at the time, which I have so much compassion now for people who come into my office who have never seen a dietitian before, who aren't fully, either don't have a diagnosis or feel like, eh, maybe this is, maybe everyone's just like being dramatic kind of thing. Um, yeah, and I have so much compassion for people now because I know like all of it is so new. Like you don't even know what healing looks like. So yeah, there was definitely so much anxiety that came up around that. And I must have trusted my therapist enough because I went back and I continued to see her and she really helped me. But definitely some mixed feelings as there are for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, that's so normal to not be just totally ready to jump in head first right
Mm,
away or to be feel a little ambivalent or questioning or doubting. That's
right.
normal. Yeah. So, so I'm interested to know, like, how did you deal, or did you have this kind of fear of what your body would do? Like going into recovery, did that
Oh,
come up for you? Were you scared about your
totally.
body
Yes.
changing? Okay. I mean, that might be a
Yeah.
silly question, but yeah, tell me about
Yeah,
that.
no, not at all. Yeah, I think that was a big thing for me. And what I struggled with that for a really long time, and that was a huge barrier to making any change at all. And like as with so many people, like I want to be able to control this 100%. And if I do this thing, I don't know what will happen, and that is really scary. Um, I think what was ultimately really, really helpful in that was discovering like the body positive, fat positive movement, which I don't know how I came across on social media, but it was definitely on, I think it was, I don't know, some sort of blog or Instagram at the time that seeing diverse bodies and just like learning more about body acceptance and fat positivity in general really clicked with me. And I think that set off some sort of anger of like, why did this world convince me that this is so important? Um,
That's so great. So like, so what you're saying is kind of looking at the systemic reasons for like the social conditioning and the
yeah,
thin ideal, like kind of getting a little like angry about the messaging you've gotten your whole life, opening your eyes to it, seeing it for what it is, and then kind of naming it, calling it out, and being like, no, like I don't buy into that.
yeah, definitely. I think that was such a huge eye opener to me that like I was even when I was younger, like I read a lot of like quote women's health in like giant air quotes magazines that aren't super healthy at all, but that promoted all these things and showed all these body types, and I bought into that so much. And I think when I started to realize like, oh, none of these things are feel good to me, or once I started to learn more about eating disorders, for sure, I was like, oh, all of this is disordered. Or I shouldn't say all. I'm sure there are some good magazines out there, but a lot of what I was reading and exposed to growing up, I can see was like um, not supportive of a healthy body image in any way.
Yeah, it's so sad. It's like we're somehow surprised when people develop these real issues with food and body, and then we look at, well, what's the messaging we're
Right.
getting from like so young, and it's no wonder. We
Yeah.
we value, like, we as a society think, especially well, not especially, just like anyone in any body, like we think that bodies are what, like, if not the most, one of the most important things about who we are. It's tied to love and connection and worthiness and all the things that pretty much everybody wants for good reason, but it's just so insidious and sad how it plays out for so many.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think when I realized that my body was keeping me from being like I thought that having like the smallest body and being healthy and toned or whatever, like whatever I thought at the time, like that made me like good. Like that didn't make me a fun person or that didn't make me an interesting person. Like it wasn't making me the person that I wanted to be.
Was it
And
taking you further away from that?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there was a while where I felt like I could manage and was doing okay, but there just got to be a point where I felt like I was skipping things I cared about to like go to the gym or like I was just so tired I couldn't do anything or like skipping social events because I was so worried about, food or exercise or all that kind of thing. And I got to a point where it started to feel really isolating and it just made it harder for me to have conversations with people. Like my brain wasn't, yeah, I was just living in like a state of brain fog all the time that prevented me from having like the interesting conversations that I wanted to have with people or, um, yeah, like learning the things that I wanted to learn. It just was interfering with so many things that I actually cared about. And I
That's
think
super
honestly, it took a while.
interesting, Megan, because like okay, I just want to circle this back to what you said earlier. You were the healthy girl, but as you're
Mm-hmm.
describing what your experience was, we need to just take a look at this word healthy. Like you couldn't engage
Right.
socially the way, like, that's healthy, right? You couldn't eat in a healthy, like mentally healthy or
Mm-hmm.
physically healthy way. I don't know if I'm putting words in your mouth, but many
Yep.
times sleep is really hard when you're not
Oh yeah.
adequately nourished. And this is the thing
Yeah.
that I think is so important for me people to understand, is this idea culturally we have about what it means to be healthy is actually really messed up, because we, like, so often the people who we look at as the quote the healthiest, if we got to see them and be a fly on the wall in their day-to-day lives and interactions, like, a lot of times they're really truly not mentally, physically, emotionally, sleep-wise, food-wise, and in any other way, like, what we would consider objectively healthy as a person, right?
Yeah, totally. I think this I talk about with clients now a lot is like food and body is like food and exercise, I mean, is one portion of health. It's not nearly as big as we make it out to be. And there's so many other things that matter just as much. And even in that case, like food and exercise were not going well for me. It's not like I had that one thing and everything else um, was not not there. Like everything just felt hard. I wasn't really, like I said, showing up in any way that felt good. I thought I was eating really healthy, which I think is part of the problem of what we sell as healthy eating is
Right.
a lot of times not at all.
Well, let's name that. Like, what culturally do we think of when we think of healthy foods, quote unquote, big quotes, but
Mm,
like,
yeah,
what do you think people think healthy means?
yeah. I mean, I would say, and I ask this sometimes to my clients, and I would say like fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein. Um, yeah, like a very cookie cutter idea of what healthy foods are. And sure, those things are nutrient dense. We need them in some amount. And also, that leaves out so many things.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think sometimes what people think of when they think healthy foods, it's just code for least amount of
right.
energy possible,
Yeah.
right? So like the healthy option is the option that doesn't have as many calories, right?
Hmm. Totally. I think that is a huge. I think that's totally true. Where really calories determine how we think about foods, and like if it's a lesser amount of calories, then it has to be better for us. And that's so not true. Our bodies need energy. Our bodies need a lot of energy.
Yeah, I
Um,
so was that a paradigm shift for you in recovery? Like
mm,
I just have to say, like for me, I don't have an eating disorder history, but there was a time in my life where I really thought of foods as like the healthy options were the ones that were, you know, the least amount of food possible, basically. Like I'm healthy if I can get by on the least amount of food possible. And
mm,
I realized that's totally like bananas because actually, if I try to eat like a smaller caloric meal, what ends up happening is I'm so hungry, I eat just
right,
what I would have eaten plus then some because like I'm just feeling a little out of my mind, you know? And so like
right. Yeah,
reframing the idea of healthy eating from eating the least amount possible to actually giving your body what it needs, which by the way, like we've got to be honest, like our bodies need a lot of food. Like
yeah.
we need solid, satisfying, yummy, filling meals multiple times a day,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah,
That was a big
yeah.
paradigm shift for me. So I'm curious, did you have any of anything like that for you?
Definitely. I think I was very much the same mindset of like the kind of like the lesser. I mean, I was very much thinking about calories for a portion of that time, but definitely the lesser the better kind of thing. And that was not healthy in the sense that like that did not support me to do what I needed to do. Like I would eat a lunch and still be hungry and then have to go to class or do an assignment or something like that. And I just didn't have the energy to do that. I didn't really have the energy to do much. And like what is healthy about that?
Exactly. Exactly. Like, and here's what I think most people or many people will relate to. Like, have you ever had a client say, well, I'm really good throughout the day, and then at night, I just can't get control over myself or whatever? Like,
Mm,
and I'm using words that clients use. I wouldn't use those words
yeah,
myself. Um, and like, I really like to help kind of shift the perspective of like your body's really smart and it wants to keep you um, energized and keep you fed. And it'll kind of do it in its own way, even if you're trying to override your
right.
needs. And so shifting the mentality from how do I like eat the least amount possible during the day and think that that's like label that as good to like how do I actually eat enough to feel full and satisfied so that I can have the energy to do what matters to me. Like that's healthy, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think if we are really honest about like being totally like when you say clients say like being good throughout the day, which is something I hear a lot. A lot of times, what that means is like I'm eating things that are pretty low energy throughout the day that I consider to be healthy, and then at night I'm eating higher energy foods,
Yeah,
basically
that is what
like the good and
that's
bad
code for that. Yeah,
meals.
for sure.
Um, which it makes total sense if you think about it. If we take a step back from like diet culture coding and the way we think about foods, it makes sense that if you're eating low amounts of energy during the day, your body is going to want to make up for that deficit as much as it can. So it makes sense that at night you're craving higher energy things.
Yeah, exactly. So did you have to kind of do any philosophical, well, I know you have as a dietitian, so there's kind of two sides
Mm,
of this story for you. There's the side that's the human who was struggling with food and body image stuff, who had to kind of like pull yourself out of that and kind of work really hard in therapy and otherwise to heal and recover. But then there's the dietitian part of you that's like, okay, who am I? What kind of dietitian am I going to be? how am I going to practice? What are my philosophical values and underpinnings? I imagine that that kind of weaves together. Um,
Mm,
but I'm
definitely.
interested to know, like, how, like, where did you philosophically, where have you come to, and how did you get there, and what kinds of things were helpful for you to kind of, like, for instance, switch your thoughts about, I mean, a lot of people don't like healthy, the word healthy, and I'll just like own that. I'm using that word because that's a word that it gets thrown around a lot, especially outside of eating disorder recovery circles. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that people understand, um, like what we mean when we say that, like that, people can kind of use that to mean actually not really healthy things.
Hmm.
And I had to do some philosophical work to be like, well, wait a minute, what does this word mean? And do I like this word? Do I want to reclaim it in a actually truly healthy way, or do I want to get rid of that word, or do I believe something else? Like, there's a lot of kind of internal soul searching
Yeah.
that needs to be done to kind of figure out, where do I stand with food? What's important to me? What matters? What's my philosophy? I'd be interested to know what that was like for you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think those things definitely weaved together, just given the timing of my own history and when I was in college. I think um, towards the end of college, we actually learned about health at every size, like very, very briefly. I remember exactly our professor, who I actually liked a lot, but was like, "There's this thing called health at every size. I don't believe in it, but it exists." And we had to do a project about it. And I remember when we did that, that really resonated with me. Even in the context of like, we were not learning it as like a this should be like the cornerstone of dietetics by any means, but it still really resonated with me. And I think I did a lot of my own, as I was in my own recovery, figuring out what healthy meant for me, was really complicated and took a really long time. And by the time when I was in my internship, I think that's where I got to this crossroads of like, I don't know if I want to be a dietitian, because a lot of my rotations that I was involved in, were a lot of like weight loss or like quote unquote healthy eating in a way that didn't really make sense to me or didn't feel good to me. And I remember doing these things and feeling like very at odds with what I thought about food and what I was teaching, or um, yeah, when I was counseling and doing presentations and talking to people, like it felt very um, hypocritical to my values, even if at that point, I don't think I could have voiced that at all. I just knew like, oh, this doesn't feel good, and I don't think I want to be a dietitian if that's what this means. Um, so yeah, it took a lot of time and unpacking and work in my own therapy, and then learning on a on the professional side, like learning about health at every size and intuitive eating, and um, yeah, just reading more about it made a lot of sense to me and informed my own recovery, and that informs the work I do now. So it is very definitely intertwined.
Okay, let's dig in a little bit about this professor saying that, because here's why. Like, I have so much um, compassion and space that I like to hold for people who feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're welcome here, and I get it. It's challenging, and it's a big paradigm shift, and it's a lot of looking at yourself and seeing parts of you that might be a little less than pleasant to notice. So it's a lot, and I
Yeah.
get it. But I think it might be cool for you and me to sort of look at that common thing we hear of like, well, I don't believe in that. First of
Right.
all, like just for anyone who might be new to the podcast, what is health at every size? Like, define it really quick just so that people aren't lost. And then let's talk about what does it mean to believe it or not believe it? Like, it's not a religion, and so I'm not really even
Yeah.
sure. Anyway, I'm not really even sure what that means, but I wanna unpack that a bit with you. So start by
Sure.
talking about what is health at every size.
Yeah, so Health at Every Size was born from the Health at Every Size book by Linda Bacon. It's it is there's a lot of things to it, but to make it brief, separating weight from health is kind of one of the big paradigm shifts of, and I think it's important to note, health at every size does not mean healthy at every size. So it's not saying that everyone in their current body size is healthy. It's saying that body size does not determine whether we are healthy or not. Um, and it's yeah, focuses on health promoting behaviors in addition to taking note of uh, the social cultural factors that impact health.
Yes. Okay, and I'll just add the five principles because I just looked that up and I think it will
Yes.
be helpful for people to hear this. So I'll just read this so that we're all very clear as we talk about this. The health at every size principles are, and by the way, if you'd like to look this up yourself and learn more, I'll link to this in the show notes, but also you can go to sizediversityandhealth.org. Okay, so here we are. The health at every size principles are number one, weight inclusivity. Accept and respect the inherent diversity of body shapes and sizes and reject the idealizing or pathologizing of specific weights. Two, health enhancement. Support health policies that improve and equalize access to information and services and personal practices that improve human well being, including attention to individual physical, economic, social, spiritual, emotional, and other needs. Number three, respectful care. Acknowledge our biases and work to end weight discrimination, weight stigma, and weight bias. Provide information and services from an understanding that socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, and other identities impact weight stigma, and support environments that address these inequities. Number four, eating for well being. Promote flexible, individualized eating based on hunger, satiety, nutritional needs, and pleasure, rather than externally regulated eating plan focused on weight control. And number five, life enhancing movement. Support physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose.
Yes.
So,
I'm very glad you read those. I could not do that justice.
yeah, no, you did a great job. Like it's hard. It's a big idea. It's a big philosophy,
Hmm.
so it's hard to just like do a quick one sentence summary.
Yes.
um, but I think like my feeling on this is that I think sometimes people come across health at every size online, which makes sense. We're online a lot as a culture, um, and we might like just catch a little blurb from someone. We might have a even like like a subconscious response to what we're seeing or what we're reading, or it might challenge our core belief, or it might challenge our own privilege, and
Mm,
it might shine a light on a part of you that's kind of prejudiced or not so fun to look at. And so I think sometimes the initial knee jerk reaction is, no, wait, this is like this can't be right. Like this is so different from what I've heard my whole life about bodies and sizes. But when you dig in and you look at the actual principles, it's like who wouldn't want respectful care for everyone? Who wouldn't want eating for well-being and life-enhancing movement and health enhancement? And who wouldn't want an environment where we can agree to treat people as humans and regardless of the size of their body. That helps me, that helps you, that helps kids,
right.
that helps neighbors and older people. And I mean, it's good for everyone when we are not just white knuckling it through our lives so afraid of fatness, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to to that professor, I wonder what her understanding of health at every size was at the time. Um, because knowing her, I don't think if I read her those principles, she'd be like, no, that doesn't, we shouldn't be doing that. Like, I don't think that would be the response at all. But I think we do have a culture, like you said, that we see things line. We're not necessarily getting the whole picture. We're not necessarily even getting correct information. And because health at every size is so different than what we are sold, I think it is easy to kind of, jump back and be like, oh no, I don't know about that.
Yeah, and
Um,
and you said this earlier, but let's unpack this a little bit too. A lot of the confusion comes from thinking it's healthy at every size. So do you want to
mm,
comment on that?
yeah, so this is something I hear from people a lot, especially I'm on social media a lot, and people be like, well, I'm not healthy at the size, or like how dare you say everyone's healthy at their sizes? And I think clarifying that the movement is health at every size, not healthy at every size. So there are, like I said, we when we separate weight from health, we can what like we've been talking about what healthy actually is. And it may be that you are at a low weight and not healthy. It may be that you're at a high weight and not healthy. It may be that you are at a high weight and healthy. Like those things do not correlate with each other the way we're kind of taught that they do. It takes, I think, a lot of times why this is so hard is because we are taught so much and so clearly that weight is a determinant of health. Like we get that message from everywhere, starting very young, even in in schools. I work with quite a few adolescents and teens, and I hear what they learn in schools, and I'm like, it makes me want to rip my hair out. Like it's not, um, it's very much weight focused, and I think that realizing that might not necessarily be true can be really uncomfortable.
For sure. And that hyper focus on weight as being the most important thing for health actually is not health
Mm,
promoting. Like there's actually really good solid science showing that the more we try to deliver weight related feedback as a motivator for change, like the worse people do. There's one study that found that the way that people coped with weight stigma, 79% of the participants actually ended up just eating like more food to
mm,
cope with the stigma that they experience. So if we're like, this is the thing about conversations about health. Like I notice a lot of people in the eating disorder world will kind of like reject the term health or the word healthy. Like, I don't want to use that word because it's such a diety word. And I get that. And I think everyone reserves the right to use the language that they want. But for me
yeah.
personally, I think health is so important for me as a dietitian to kind of stay true to, like philosophically and like values wise, like that's a big part of what I feel like it's my work is to help people find like that real true health for them. And so like I don't shy away from the term. I don't dislike it. So with all that being said, if we're really talking about promoting health, which I believe many people truly think that they are,
Mm,
but we have to look at like how's it going, like how's that working for us, like is that actually promoting health and well-being, or is that intervention, or is that comment, or is that advice, or is that whatever it might be, whatever the intervention is. I think us as providers, we need to start looking at like, does it actually promote health for that person? And
right.
the truth is, like, when someone thinks that their body is wrong, regardless of actual like health status, or regardless of actual like even BMI category, which I'm not a fan of BMI categories, but just to kind of speak the language that people listening will understand, you actually are subjected to a higher mortality risk when you think that your body is wrong. You actually have
Mm,
higher circulating um,
stress
inflammatory
on.
biomarkers in your body when you think that your body is wrong. Like, if
Mm,
we're really trying to promote health, we just need to actually look at the fact that our weight, like obsessing about our weight and thinking that our bodies are wrong, is not helping us to be healthier.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, like you said, there has to be some reclaiming of the word health because it's been so misconstrued to mean something that I don't align with at all. Like we were talking about, like the lowest calorie foods and like kind of these like workout plans that like don't feel good to a lot of people. Like that is not what health means to me, which is why sometimes I think on social media, like I avoid using the term like healthy eating because I know at first glance that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
necessarily subscribe to all of those things. Um, so yeah, I think definitely in my work, it's a lot of like figuring out what health means to someone, and helping them redefine that for themselves and helping them find a pattern um, of eating and moving, but also like resting and connecting and all the things that really matter to health that feel good to them, while also acknowledging that like if health, you are under no obligation to strive for health, and if that's not a thing that is accessible or reasonable to you at certain seasons of your life, like that is okay.
Yeah. You're not a bad person if your body is in poor health or if you are in poor health. Like that's another
Right.
insidious part of all this is this narrative that you are to blame if you have something going on with you health wise. I've seen it
Mm,
so much, and there these whatever health condition is out there, like there's so many factors to consider as far as how that developed for you. And
right.
sure, behaviors may have played a role, but how, like, are you also thinking about your environment, your socioeconomic status, class, race, gender,
Mhm.
oppression, like all these other things that, like, if your body is in constant fight or flight because of your body size, like, okay, is that constant activation of the stress response to blame for your heart disease, or is it your weight, or like it's we've got to start looking at these other factors that play a role in our health and well-being, and not blame ourselves when or
Absolutely.
others when our health isn't in a perfect state, right? Which, by the way, no one's health is in a perfect state.
Right. Right. Definitely. And even a lot of times when people are in larger bodies, they don't want to go to the doctor because they experience so much weight stigma in that situation. And that certainly doesn't help. That certainly is not healthy. Like, there's so many, like you said, so many factors that influence our health status, and
Right.
we ignore
That is
so
such an
many
important
of them.
point, Megan. Like the idea of delaying care or not going to the doctor, when you live in a larger body, like that is real. That is a real
Mm,
thing. And when we have studies that come out that say that like higher BMI people might, or higher weight people might, be associated with like this X, Y, or Z condition. I've had people ask me this. Well, how could you say that health at every size is real if we see this in the literature? And I always explain, like, are we controlling for the bias and stigma that someone experiences, or the fact that they don't go and see a doctor because of all that bias? And and
right.
how does even if they do go to the doctor, how does that affect the care, the treatment, the tests that they
Mhm.
end up receiving, right? Or is it
Yeah,
always just lose weight for every ailment?
yeah, totally. And on top of that, like, are we controlling for weight cycling, which we know has a lot of negative health impacts? And a lot of times, if people are told to lose weight, that sets them up for weight cycling, which is essentially yo-yo dieting of like losing some weight, gaining it back, losing, like our bodies don't respond well to that. And
Yes,
most bodies don't control for that either.
right. And that in and of itself, weight cycling has been associated with like insulin resistance, high blood
Mhm.
pressure. There's like a couple other ones. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but you're so right. We're not controlling for that. So when we're looking at, you know, epidemiological studies or looking at associations, we need to keep in mind when body size is in there, or even other factors that affect our health and well-being, like socioeconomic status, oppression, race, gender, all of that stuff. Like we have to keep in mind, like there's other variables at play, and it's not just a simple this body size equals this elevated risk for this condition. Like
Right.
we've got to think critically about what is it like to live in that body, like socially, spiritually, emotionally, and so much of those aspects of our health are not really given any time and energy to. It's all
Right.
move your body and eat food, right? Like that's the advice. But what about sleep? And what about rest? And what about social connection? And what about
Right.
meaning and purpose in your life? And all this stuff that's like really, really important.
Right. And it makes total sense that if someone is told, if someone has a health condition and every time they go to the doctor, they're told to lose weight or move more, it makes sense that if their condition gets worse or if they develop another condition or whatever it is, it makes sense that they do blame themselves. It's like, oh, I just didn't do this thing enough. When really weight and or food and exercise don't are not the only thing, are not the only factor by far. It actually doesn't account for that high percentage of our health outcomes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I just thought of a little anecdote that I'd like to share and get your thoughts on. It's
Mm.
really common for me to hear uh, lots of concern and worry about eating sugar in
Hmm.
relation
Oh,
to
yeah.
like health, right? Um, and I'll just share this, and then I'd love to hear. I'm sure you have lots of things to add, but it's very common for me to kind of have a client come in and say, "Gosh, I'm so worried about all the sugar I'm eating. It's just so unhealthy. I'm going to die anytime soon." Like they'll say stuff like this. And then, and I just listen and I just kind of like really try to sort of gather and notice the level of stress that this person is experiencing.
Hmm.
And it's always interesting for me when someone feels open to it to just say like, okay, well, what about like how much you're stressing out about this sugar? like
Hmm.
like when we're talking about health, we commonly just think it's all about what we put in our mouth. And this is an Alan Levinovitz idea, but at the expense of considering what we allow to come into our minds, right? Where I think he says like shunning quote unquote junk food, but binging on bad science. So the idea of like, oh, it's all about what I eat, but I'm gonna be so stressed out about
Right.
food and not considering the effect like health wise that stress has on your body. So I'll often tell people like the stress you feel about eating that cookie is way, way, way worse for your
Right.
body than than that sugar in that cookie or whatever. Um,
Yes.
what do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. This is something I talk with clients about a lot. And I was just talking to someone this week about like if we externalize that voice and someone was following you around yelling like, don't eat so much sugar, you're gonna die, you're gonna die, like everything that that voice is telling you in your head, you would, if that voice was following you around, you would be so stressed. I can't even imagine how stressful that would be. And that really is what's happening. And we, in those situations, like our stress hormones increase. That increases inflammation. Like all this, the stress response is so active, and that we have a lot of research that shows that that is not supportive to our health in any way. And not a lot of research that shows that like a cookie is going to derail our health. It the we I think it's really, and this is not any individual's fault, certainly just the culture sets us up for a disproportionate fear of food when there are so many other factors that have more of an impact that we ignore a lot of the time
Yeah.
culturally.
Yeah, and in context of, if you are a person who values health, I just want to invite you to think about like what does make you feel well? What when your life looks
Mm-hmm.
this way, like I'll give you an example for me. I know that the biggest foundation for my mental, physical, spiritual, emotional health is sleep. So I guard it. I guard it. I protect it. I hardly ever stay up late. I'll make exceptions. I can be flexible with it if it's important to me. But in general,
Mm-hmm.
like I get good amounts of sleep. Like we're talking like 9 hours. Like I need it, sometimes 10.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for me, that's one of the things that I have learned that I can't really compromise on. And when I get that as a foundation, it's so much easier to um, rest and move and eat and hydrate and do my work and be a parent and do all the things in my life that are important to me, that those all kind of fall into place when that's there, when that's in balance. Sure, I will occasionally kind of be like, you know what? I need to go to the grocery store. I need to kind of make sure I'm making that happen, or some element of my relationship with food sometimes needs a little like
Hmm.
refocusing, because life gets busy.
Right.
But like I when that is in balance with rest, which is in balance with leisure time and social
Hmm.
things and quiet time, and I feel well when I'm giving time and energy to lots of different parts of myself that need nurturing. When it's
Mm,
all just food, I don't feel very
yeah.
healthy.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And this is a question I ask people I work with a lot of like, what has been feeling good lately? Like, what makes you feel well? And even making a list at the end of the day of like, what did I do today that felt really aligned with the things I care about or just like made me feel really good in my body? Um, and that will look different for everyone. Like the amount of rest and social time. I know personally, like, I am an introvert and I probably need more rest and downtime than someone who maybe is more extroverted and wants more connection. Like, I might need that in a smaller amount, and that's all okay. And it takes time to figure out what works. And that includes movement and food. Like, movement looks different for everybody. It will always be nobody's pie chart, for so to speak, is going to look exactly the same, and that is okay. And it might not even look the same for you through different seasons in your life, and that's also okay.
Yeah, I love that. So expanding our idea of what it means to quote unquote be healthy or to honor our health as like sure you can like allow a little time and energy toward food and your relationship with it, but also don't do that at the expense of your own like stress management or like getting outside and being in nature or getting adequate sleep, like whatever it is that you need to feel whole and well, like tune into that, trust that that's good and that's going to be right for you. Like you said, it could be different than someone else, but trust that, lean into that, honor that, and notice how actually food gets easier when your life is more
Yeah.
balanced in that way too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is, at least in my experience, and I think this has been the experience of other people I have worked with, it those two things feed into each other, where like as I started to nourish myself more thoughtfully and move my body in a way that felt good, or not moving my body in a way that felt good, that made it easier to engage in those other things. And as I engaged in those other things more, that made it easier to like to continue nourishing my body and doing all these things that felt good. It really, those two things really fed into each other for me, and I think they do for a lot of other people.
Yeah, I love that. I
Mm,
relate to that too. It's like letting yourself be a whole person, not just someone who eats, a whole person with other needs and other
hmm.
elements of your health and well-being, like allowing those things some time and energy, like can really help put maybe areas where you've struggled into perspective. Like, oh gosh, when I get enough sleep and when I engage socially and I find meaning and purpose outside of, my body, I really start to recognize like, oh, this food thing, like it's just not as
Yeah,
important, which I think can
yeah,
be so
definitely.
liberating and cool to experience.
Yeah, I think there were so many things that I learned about myself in that process of like, oh, I think I do need a lot more sleep than I'm giving myself. And also, not nourishing yourself properly does make sleep really hard. And like, I think rediscovering like, I need a lot of sleep and I need good sleep. And that is way more important to me than like what I am eating most of the time. Like you said, that really, I relate to that a lot of like, that's a bedrock of a lot of the things I do. If I'm not sleeping enough, I'm not doing my best. So yeah, I mean, I think,
I love it. So like that was cool because you were kind of circling back to your own experience and kind of what you've learned. Would you add anything else like in
yeah.
context of this of like sharing your story, but also kind of exploring this concept of health, healthy. Anything else you'd want to add?
Um, I don't, I mean, I think we covered so many things. I think just really being really critical about the messages about health that we get. Like I said, like I read a lot of like health magazines and none of what they recommended ever lined up with what I needed for my body. And I think even on social media now, you could find there's so many things that might inform your idea of health, and really just having a critical eye about what makes sense to you, what feels good to you. If it works for someone else, that doesn't mean that it has to work for you. And I think, yeah, just being really, really thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I love it. Megan, where can people find you, follow along, work with you?
Yeah, so my website is newmoonrd.com. I am on Instagram at newmoonrd. Those are the two places I hang out most often, and you can find all the information there.
Okay, and I'll link to that as well. Thank you so much, Megan. It was so great to talk about this, and I think honestly, like people need more resources for how to think about the word healthy. So I'm really glad you were willing to talk with me about
Mm,
that today. I think that hopefully got some people thinking and gave some good ideas of how we could kind of reframe that
yeah,
concept in a truly healthy way.
yeah, this was great. Thanks so much, Paige.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.